Eli Cross had never meant to leave Earth. His world was a loop of engineering labs, ramen cups, and lonely stargazing from his rooftop in Seattle. He wasn't a scientist on the verge of interstellar breakthrough, just a curious mind with access to a high-frequency quantum emitter his late father had been developing for deep space messaging. It was supposed to be a harmless experiment. One signal, one ping into the void. The night sky hummed with static as a solar flare crossed Earth's upper atmosphere. Eli's garage-turned laboratory flickered with unnatural light, and his monitor exploded in fractal shapes that defied physics. Before he could yank the emergency cutoff, the world folded in on itself with a soundless scream. His body twisted, not in pain, but as if logic lost its grip on him, and then he was falling upward like a thought unspoken. He landed on polished stone, surrounded by a silence so thick it felt ceremonial. Golden light streamed through crystalline arches. Armored figures turned toward him, their armor seamless, curved like bone and metal fused by starlight. Behind them rose a throne that shimmered like it was alive, carved from a single colossal gem, and on that throne sat a woman. She was impossibly still. Hair like white fire flowed over shoulder plates etched with symbols he couldn't read. Her eyes, glowing faintly silver, studied him not with suspicion, but with awe. She rose, and the room moved with her, as if even the architecture answered to her will. "He has arrived," she said, her voice both ethereal and absolute. Eli blinked. "What?" The guards knelt. The woman stepped forward, gaze locked on him. "You answer the call of the consort sigil. The rite is sealed by your presence." "I think there's a misunderstanding," Eli said, holding his hands up. "I'm not. I was just trying to test the communications frequency." The queen regarded him as one might regard a cloud suddenly forming a familiar shape. "You carry the mark. The bond is recognized by the throne, by law and prophecy. You are now consort to the sovereign of Lissarian." Eli opened his mouth, then shut it. He had no idea what a Lissarian was, or how he became engaged by accident, but there was an unmistakable finality in her tone. Around him, the guards rose as one. A symphony of gold and blue armor clinked into formation. He was ushered forward, dazed, toward the throne where she had sat. "I'm Eli, from Earth, not from here. I am Seraphina of House Viral. You are not a Lissarian." "That much is clear," she said, walking beside him. "Yet your presence fulfills an oath older than my reign. Do not mistake this for chance. Does this sort of thing happen a lot around here?" "No, which is why it matters." They moved through corridors carved from metallic crystal, humming with energy. What struck Eli wasn't just the otherworldly beauty. It was a reverence Eli awoke to the whisper of unfamiliar voices, a sound like wind over water, layered with tones he couldn't place. Light filtered through the crystalline ceiling in waves, shifting as if drawn from a living sky. His clothes had been changed, now clad in smooth, iridescent fabric that adjusted its temperature to his skin. As he rose, a tall figure stepped into the room, bowing stiffly. "You are summoned to Hall of Concord, Consort Cross," the woman said, voice formal but lacking warmth. "Right. Because I'm consort now," he muttered, trying not to trip on the overly graceful robe as he followed her. The palace's internal chambers were quieter than the day before, but tension lingered in the air, thin and electric. Servants and guards bowed with forced courtesy, their gazes lingering a moment too long. Eli felt the weight of their eyes. Curiosity tinged with something colder, disapproval. The Hall of Concord was a towering amphitheater, open to the sky and lined with gleaming statues of rulers past. At the center stood Seraphina, regal and still, her armor exchanged for formal robes lined with living gold. She didn't smile when he approached, but her nod was subtle encouragement. Around her stood the Royal Council, 11 members in varying robes, colors, and body types, some humanoid, others not quite. "Let be recorded," one council began, his voice deep and resonant, "that Queen Seraphina Viral presents her consort to the High Assembly." Eli gave an awkward wave. "Hi." Silence. Another counselor, this one with angular features and a crest of bioluminescent scales, stepped forward. "The sigil may have chosen, but he is unproven, an outsider. His presence destabilizes long-standing alliances. We demand a trial of legitimacy. Serafina's eyes narrowed. He was summoned by the sigil. That alone affirms legitimacy. He is untrained, ignorant of our customs. His lack of heritage could be weaponized against you. The scaly counselor pressed. Eli cleared his throat. I don't mean to offend anyone. I didn't come here on purpose. But if I'm stuck, I'd like to understand what you expect from me. Another counselor, a woman with eyes like molten silver, stepped forward. We expect loyalty, service, wisdom enough to not tip the balance of our galaxy into chaos. Do you possess its qualities, Earthborn? I possess a willingness to try, Eli replied more steadily than he felt. There was a murmur among the council, low and unreadable. Serafina raised her hand, silencing them. He will not be judged by blood, but by deed, and if he is to serve Lysarian, he must learn. So began Eli's education. His days became a blur of language drills, cultural briefings, and strategy simulations. He learned the difference between a formal bow and a challenge posture, between honor duels and symbolic rites. He was taught the planetary alliances, the ancient wars of succession, and how to navigate a court where every word could be political weaponry. Serafina joined him when she could, correcting his stance, his phrasing, his instincts. She didn't coddle. She challenged him, and with every encounter, he began to understand why she commanded such reverence. Her mind was sharp as a blade, her composure unshakable, but it was the rare flickers of vulnerability that haunted him. In quiet moments, she would stare past the palace walls, as if listening for a storm that hadn't yet broken. One evening, during a lesson on alien ethics, Serafina dismissed the scholars and sat beside him. For a while, neither spoke. They want me gone, Eli said eventually. They want control, she replied. And you disrupt the pattern. Patterns comfort them. You do not. Do you regret it? Me being here. Her eyes softened. No, but I fear what others will do to ensure you don't stay. That night, as Eli returned to his quarters, a figure emerged from the shadows. Tall, armored, and unmistakably hostile. Earthling, the man said, his voice like gravel soaked in venom. You've insulted tradition and forced your way into our queen's side. That ends now. Eli's breath caught. I didn't force anything, and I'm not trying to. You've already done enough, the man growled, stepping closer. I am General Varkos, protector of the realm. You are a liability I cannot allow to remain untested. Tested how? Eli asked, heart hammering. A demonstration. Tomorrow. Arena of Accord. You'll either fight or forfeit. Before Eli could answer, Varkos vanished into the dark. He spent the night studying everything he could about the arena, its history, its customs, its rules. It wasn't a battle to the death, but it wasn't a game either. It was public, ceremonial, a way to challenge one's worth without igniting civil war. Serafina found him before dawn. You don't have to do this, she said. If I don't, I lose whatever chance I have of being more than just a symbol. She regarded him for a long moment, then handed him a vambrace laced with shimmering circuitry. Then wear this. It adapts to your nerve responses. Think, and it will respond. Like magic, like science your people haven't caught up to. The arena was a bowl of stone and light, filled with thousands of spectators. Varko stood in the center, armored in obsidian, a beast of a man with a scar across his throat and fire in his eyes. Eli stepped into the arena, the vambrace humming on his forearm. The duel was swift, brutal, and entirely one-sided. For the first minute, Varkos came at him with force and precision. Every strike a statement. You don't belong. You are nothing. But Eli was quick, smarter than he looked, and desperate to prove something. Anything. He didn't need to win. He needed to survive. He dodged, rolled, used the environment. The vambrace responded to his thoughts, creating energy pulses that disrupted Varkos' rhythm. Cheers and gasps rang out. The tide shifted. Varkos growled and lunged for a final strike, but Eli twisted just enough of the blow to glance off, and his counter sent a surge through the general's armor, locking it in place. The crowd went silent. Varkos fell to one knee, immobilized, pride cracked but not broken. Eli lowered his arm, chest heaving. Still think I don't belong? Serafina stepped into the arena, her voice ringing clear. "Let all bear witness. The consort has faced his trial, not by lineage, not by prophecy, but by choice." There was applause, hesitant at first, then rising like a wave. Later, in the quiet of the observatory, Serafina poured them both a translucent drink that glowed faintly. "You could have walked away," she said. "I almost did," Eli admitted, "but I wanted to understand why I stayed." "And do you?" He raised his glass. "Not entirely, but I know what I'm fighting for now." Their glasses touched. The sound echoed like a promise. And far below, in the chambers where whispers grew teeth, others began to plan. Because when a stranger rises, the old guard does not sit quietly. The celebration was short-lived. Eli had barely earned a moment of recognition before the tone of the palace shifted. Smiles became thinner, greetings more cautious. The court had accepted his victory, but not without scrutiny. His legitimacy was no longer questioned openly. Yet he could feel the growing tension beneath the surface, as if the foundations of Lysarian's politics were cracking, and his presence was the fault line. Serafina grew more guarded. In council meetings she was firm, but the fire in her eyes was dimmer, buried beneath layers of diplomacy and restraint. She carried herself as always, unshakable, decisive. But Eli could sense the pressure pressing in on her, the strain of ruling, of keeping the balance, of protecting him. One evening, she summoned him not to the throne room or training hall, but to the sanctum of echoes, an ancient part of the palace rarely entered, where rulers once meditated and where truth, it was said, echoed without distortion. The walls glowed faintly, etched with runes that pulsed as they entered. Here, the air was heavier, filled with memories. "You need to see what this place stands on," she said quietly. She placed her palm against the central monolith, and light spilled out in waves. A holographic tapestry unfolded, showing Lysarian's history in motion, glorious, tragic, and stained with cycles of war and fragile peace. 100 rulers crowned and unseated, 1,000 treaties forged and shattered. And amid it all, the sigil, a swirling quantum glyph, binding them across centuries. "It chose you because our world is shifting again," Serafina said. "Old alliances fracture. Colonies resist the throne's rule. Some say the age of monarchs is ending. I rule by lineage, yes, but more by loyalty. And that loyalty phrase, because of me, in part, your arrival wasn't part of their plan. And in Lysarian, anything unplanned is dangerous." Eli watched the projection as it faded. "So what do they want?" "Control, clarity, and some want me gone." He turned to her sharply. "Who?" Serafina exhaled. "I suspect several counselors have aligned with dissenting forces. Varkos may have acted alone in the duel, but he's not the only one who sees me as vulnerable now." Eli hesitated, then stepped closer. "Why tell me this?" "Because if I fall, you fall. And if we both fall, Lysarian burns." It wasn't just metaphor. Reports have been surfacing in the outer provinces. Pirate raids, political coups, and a splinter movement calling themselves the Nova Accord, advocating for a republic forged from the Empire's ashes. Serafina had kept them at bay through treaties and military precision. But now, with the throne's legitimacy questioned, the Accord was growing bolder. One night, as Eli reviewed intelligence briefs in the strategy chamber, the palace shook. Not a tremor, an impact. Sirens blared in a low harmonic tone, meant to alert without inciting panic. He ran toward the source, joined by Serafina and 2 palace guards. Smoke curled from a shattered skybridge. Debris littered the courtyard, and in its center, embedded like a spear, was a pulse bomb casing, a signature device used only by Nova insurgents. "They breached palace defenses," Serafina muttered, eyes scanning the damage. "They're not warning us anymore. They're declaring war." Within hours, the palace was locked down. Council meetings were suspended. Dissent was no longer political. It was insurgent. Eli found himself dragged deeper into Serafina's war room, not as a consort, but as a strategist. His earthborn perspective, unfamiliar with their traditions, but rich with unconventional thinking, gave them unexpected advantages. He suggested cloaking signals that masked the palace's communications as random stellar activity. He advised using quantum interference to jam insurgent broadcasts. "You think like someone with nothing to lose," one officer remarked. "I have something to lose," Eli corrected, eyes flicking to Serafina. She didn't speak in that moment, but she didn't need to. Still, not everyone welcomed his role. One morning, Eli awoke to find his room ransacked, his personal logs deleted, and a symbol etched into the wall, a broken circle, Nova's mark. He confronted Serafina, anger simmering. "They got into my room. They're inside the palace." "They always were," she said bitterly, "and now they want you to know it." "I'm not a soldier," he snapped. "I didn't ask for this war." "No, but it's yours now, as it is mine." There was no anger in her voice, just weary truth. Later that night, Eli stood alone on the upper terrace. Stars shimmered above, cold and unreachable. He thought of Earth, its noise, its simplicity, its distance. Then he thought of Serafina, not as a queen, but as a woman burdened by legacy and constantly forced to choose strength over self. He understood now that he could no longer just be her consort in title. He had to be her shield. The next day, he made his choice. He stood before the remaining loyal council members, beside Serafina, and spoke not as an outsider, but as a partner. "You say I don't belong," he began, "that I weaken the throne, but I've seen your worlds. I've read your laws. I've fought in your arenas. I bleed where you bleed, and I'm still here, not because I was chosen, but because I choose you. I choose Lysarian." Serafina said nothing, but her eyes shone unblinking, steady. A few counselors nodded, a small gesture, but monumental in meaning. Yet even as they stood united, the palace received a final transmission. A Nova fleet had breached the outer orbital rings. Their ships, once hidden in abandoned mining belts, now approached the capital moon directly. A war was no longer coming. It had begun. The first salvo struck the edge of Lysarian's defense grid with enough force to silence 3 satellites and blind half the orbital sensors. Sirens moaned to the palace like the cries of dying stars, echoing down marble halls once reserved for ceremony and peace. War, it seemed, had come without a crown or declaration, just fire and shadow. Eli stood in the command chamber, surrounded by streams of holographic data, red-lit warnings, and the low murmur of strategists scrambling to stabilize a world unraveling. He no longer felt like a guest here. His robe had been traded for armor, simplified, adaptive, alien, and though he wasn't a soldier, he stood shoulder to shoulder with those who were. "The Nova fleet is dispersing into triformations," one officer reported. "They're avoiding direct conflict with our orbital defenses. Try to draw us into pursuit." "Let them," Eli said. "Don't give chase. Wait for them to make a mistake." Several heads turned toward him, startled by the authority in his voice. Serafina, seated at the central dais, met his gaze with approval. "Agreed," she said. "Redirect power to the planetary shields. Our ground must remain intact." From the high viewport, Lysarian's twin moons shimmered like distant lanterns, their glow now tainted by streaks of battle fire and trailing debris. The Nova Accord hadn't come to negotiate. They'd come to destroy, to reset the throne's legacy through annihilation. In the quiet hours before the second wave, Serafina met Eli in the private sanctum once more. She had removed her armor, but the weight of command still clung to her like a second skin. "This is what I feared," she said. "Not that they would rise, but that they would believe I could no longer hold them down." "You're not alone anymore," Eli replied. "That was always their mistake. Thinking you were just one mind, one voice." She looked at him with something unreadable, part sorrow, part gratitude. "You've become more than they imagined, more than I imagined." He hesitated, then stepped closer. "You asked once if I regretted being here. The answer is still no. But I do regret not understanding sooner how deep your burden runs." A faint smile played on her lips. "Then let's share it now. Until the end." They leaned in, foreheads touching briefly. It was not passion that passed between them in that moment, but purpose, silent and solemn. The battle erupted again just before dawn. Explosions rippled through the atmosphere as Nova drop pods pierced the shields. targeting key cities across the continent. Serafina deployed her elite guard, while Eli coordinated with planetary defense cells, directing counteroffensives and sabotage squads to intercept landing craft. Every move was calculated, every life measured, but war was never clean. By the third day, half of Alaris, the capital city, was under lockdown. Smoke laced the horizon. Civilians evacuated through subterranean corridors. And through it all, whispers grew that Serafina was failing, that the sigil's consort was a curse, that perhaps the throne had run its course. In the council chambers, the remaining loyalists argued for retreat, for surrender, for exile. Serafina stood alone at the center, her voice like steel. "I will not abandon my people. They are no longer yours," a council replied. "They follow fear now." "No," Eli interjected. "They follow strength. They always have. They just need to see it again." Serafina turned to him, then let them see. They devised a counterstrike, not with weapons, but with legacy, a broadcast unlike any before, a declaration of unity, truth, and defiance. Eli would speak beside her, from the ancient tower where the first rulers once stood. As the cameras rolled, he addressed the system. "I came here by accident. I didn't earn this role by birth or conquest, but I've watched this world bleed, fight, and rise again, and I chose to stay. Not because I was needed, but because I believe you were worth choosing." Then Serafina spoke, her voice carrying across the stars. "They call us relics, but we are survivors, and we will not be erased by those who burn their own history to build their future. We are Lissarian, and we endure." The message galvanized thousands. Militias turned to reinforcements. Colonies once wavering sent supplies and troops. Even factions within the Nova Accord fractured, doubting their cause. The tide, long against them, began to shift. On the sixth day, a final assault targeted the palace itself. The sky split open with flame and screaming engines as Nova fighters descended like vultures. Serafina led the defense personally, her blade singing through enemy ranks. Eli fought beside her, not with mastery, but with resolve. Every blow he parried, every command he gave, was fueled by the certainty that this war wasn't just for a crown. It was for the soul of a people. They held the palace. Barely. And in the aftermath, as smoke curled to the broken arches of the main hall, Serafina collapsed, wounded, her blood dark and shimmering against the floor. Eli caught her before she hit the stone. "Stay with me," he said, voice trembling. She looked up at him, pain eclipsed by pride. "You were never just consort." And then darkness took her. The healers worked tirelessly. She survived, but would not stand for days. Eli stood in her place, issuing orders, calming governors, quelling rebellion. The throne did not feel foreign anymore. It felt necessary. When she finally opened her eyes again, he was at her side. "You held it together," she whispered. "No," he said. "We did." She smiled then. "Weak, but real. Then perhaps this is the start, not the end." Eli nodded, feeling the shift in his bones. "Then let's begin."